guys, this is Lords of PCB and we are back here with a different kind of video, but I think this video may explain things to people who are getting into shark fishing and don't understand why their lines are getting cut all the time. This video is going to kind of dive deep more into like how sharks, but I guess more so sharks anatomy, and kind of dive in on like the microscopic level of how sharks actually are with their skin and the way that their teeth are. So basically this video I'm just going to explain on, I've been shark fishing for probably about most of my life, but I got seriously into shark fishing where I was just like, I want to catch like the biggest shark I can ever catch. And that is kind of, I've been doing that for like the last, probably about like two years. But like the first year I was just failing miserably. And I want to say the first year I got into shark fishing, I had lost almost every bigger shark that I tried to catch. So typically I like the sharks I was catching were just like, like 2 to 3 footers, but anything bigger than that I was just pretty much like losing. So this is going to be why I've lost almost every shark I hooked up with during my first serious year of shark fishing. So before we dive in on this video, I just want to say please like and subscribe. Let me know if there's anything you guys want to see. Comment, let me know. Trying to see if this is what people want to watch. And I think that this video may help out a lot of people understand the anatomy of sharks and understand why their lines are getting cut. Typically on my surf rods I was using like 80-pound braid, and 80-pound braid on a shark skin, it just gets cut so easily. So shark's skin is covered in a tooth-like structure of scales called the dermal denticles, right? So I use the word tooth because, believe it or not, the shark dermal denticles are made up of an enameloid and dentine similar to human teeth. So sharks are practically like underwater dragons. In this picture I'm going to show, the sharks are covered in this scale like armor, and they have just a mouthful of razor sharp teeth. And in the picture you can kind of see how the scales are like that. So the scales are pretty much the skin of the shark. So, and that's on a microscopic level. These dermal denticles are very unique as well. They can look very different depending on the shark species. Those dermal denticles feel extremely coarse, pretty much like sandpaper. And there's going to be another picture that's going to pop up, and this is going to showcase just the different species of sharks and their skin, and just going to show you what you're experiencing when you're catching these sharks, and why your line might be breaking. That you have to remember that on a microscopic level their scales are pretty much like razors on how they look. These dermal denticles help with the shark's ability to be able to glide through water as if it was hydrodynamics. So the shark uses the least amount of energy to swim. So the shark has been around for millions of years, and I guess I'll say it's adapted, or God designed these things to be able to swim through water just using the least amount of energy. And that's pretty much why that they have these dermal denticles and why they're shaped like that. So this is why I started having to use my own homemade heavy-duty rigs, using leader at about 400 to 600 pound mono, and I'll showcase those right here. But this is usually my typical kayak rig that I use whenever I'm doing more of like the land-based shark fishing, having to drop out baits with a kayak. And this right here is usually my surf rod rigs that I usually make, and this one's pretty dependent on what kind of surf rod you use. I use 12 foots, so my rigs are typically about 8 feet long. So, and again, I'm using 400 pound mono 400 pound wire. So this is why once I started using those rigs, I was able to catch and like actually land bigger sharks. I started getting into the like 8 footers. I think I caught a about 10 to 11 foot bull and hammer. So essentially I've been able to get into the bigger shark category by using these bigger rigs and having to think outside of the box and learning from other people. So essentially kind of what I'm trying to say is the takeaway from this video is to understand that if you're losing a bunch of sharks, it's probably more so related to you buying store-bought rigs. And it's actually funny because this is a store-bought rig, and this was the I want to say they were using 150 like mono. But if you compare this to say like my 400 like to that, I mean, think about the difference between that, you know, that this is a store-bought up here and this is my homemade. Obviously the store-bought is definitely not going to hold. And if you compare this to say like the kayak type rigs that I use for like the land-based shark fishing, I mean, you know, this thing does not have a chance. So you have to start thinking to yourself that, you know, if you want to catch bigger sharks, you know, you got to start thinking to yourself, you got to start using the most heavy tackle that you can find. As well, because of these dermal denticles on the shark, this is why I end up getting covered in a lot of scars most recently. And the reason why that you're getting these scars is usually from the shark's dermal denticles on their skin, and this is also known as shark burn. And you know, the shark burn is pretty much whenever a bigger shark happens to roll and just brushes against you, you know, when you're in the surf and you're trying to get the shark in, you end up getting just cut up from the shark's dermal denticles and they scrape against your skin. But I mean, believe it or not, I'll like barely touch the shark and have like my arm or just certain things like that, or like my my legs, and you just get completely shredded up from them. And I was like thinking to myself, I barely put my arm on the shark and I had to just get covered in scratch marks and stuff like that. So their skin is extremely sharp. And it's very obvious, like when I say it, it's like sandpaper. It's very strange because if you barely touch it, you'll just end up cut from the shark. But this is why pretty much any time that you'll see me always scraped up almost every catch. So the takeaway from this video is that I want you to understand and prepare you for the battle that you may face when you're dealing with a very big shark. So next time you wonder why a 150-pound braid or 200-pound braid snaps like a thread from a swim through, it's usually thanks to the shark's skin. And this is why in land-based shark fishing, it's all about using heavy gear and smart rigs and having quite a bit of respect for these giant sharks. You know, they are the apex predators and that they are truly adapted to their environment. So again, you know, just try to remember to yourself that, you know, don't get too upset whenever you're snapped off from your line. Just understand that you probably need to start using better rigs and you start needing to make your own rigs. And you know, I'll be trying to post more videos about how to make rigs and all that. So you know, please again, you know, like and subscribe, and you know, please let me know if there's any other stuff that you want to see. Again, this is a very different video, not something that I typically do. So I just thought I would kind of try to dive in on the anatomy of sharks and try to understand, you know, why that this is like this, and that this is probably why that you're always getting cut off and stuff like that. And you know, I think it's pretty interesting that these sharks are like this because, you know, I never knew it was like this, you know. So one of the takeaways as well is that don't lose your patience. You know, try to always stay consistent with shark fishing, and I know eventually you're gonna end up getting the bigger shark. And you know, just like me, you know, eventually it happened, and you know, you just got to learn as much as you can and understand that, you know, using heavier rigs is the key, and just trying to get back out there as much as you can. And you know, every time you get snapped off and just cut off, and hell, I still get swim throughs, and you know, that could just be another shark that's happening to swim by and just cut my line. So but pretty much what I'm just trying to say is that, you know, stay consistent, keep on going out there. You know, this hobby is a hell of a hobby when you're actually finally catching sharks and see it all come together. So